friends, this is Sophie saying happy Friday. Oh gosh, she's kind of spratty today. Oh, that doesn't look good. There we go. All right. Different location today at the second home. Today is April 3rd, so happy Friday. And I hope you're doing well. It is day 16 of missing you guys. And and there is a road right there, so you're going to hear a lot of traffic and things like that. Okay. So we are on Beverly Cleary's Henry and the Clubhouse. Oh yeah, it's a new book. Sorry, I didn't realize. I thought I saw the bookmark. I'm like, oh yeah, we've already read a chapter. But no, this is a new one for us. Henry and the Clubhouse. You'll like this one too. Table of contents. Gee, who is that? All right, Henry and the Clubhouse. And just to remind everyone, I don't own the rights to this book. This is Beverly Cleary's work. I'm just doing this during our, shutdown or quarantine, whatever we're going to call it. I'm just doing this because I miss you guys and I want to keep reading to you because it's one of my favorite things on the planet. Okay, chapter 1. My husband doesn't think we can hear him. It's okay. Henry goes for a ride. Oh my goodness, you're going to love this chapter. Henry Huggins had a lot of good ideas that fall when he first had his paper route, but somehow his ideas had a way of not turning out as he had planned. Something always went wrong. There was, for example, that Saturday afternoon in October when Henry found himself with nothing to do until it was time to start delivering journals. Naturally, he wandered into the kitchen, because, all boys do that, and opened the refrigerator to see what he could find. At the sound of the door opening, his dog, Ribsy, and his cat, Nosy, came running in case he should be planning to feed them. Here's the little picture. Trying to keep things, from blowing away. Henry, you just ate lunch, said Mrs. Huggins, who had washed her son's slacks and was now struggling to shove metal stretchers into the legs. Can't you find something to do instead of opening the refrigerator every 5 minutes? I think it's because he's a teenager, because my kids are like that too. I'm thinking, Mom, answered Henry. He was thinking he would like to build something, some kind of a house, a dog house, a tree house, or a clubhouse. A tree house would be pretty hard, but he was sure he could build a dog house or a clubhouse. All he needed was lumber and nails. Do you guys know what lumber is? I bet you do. It's the kind of wood that you build a house with, right? Well, think with the refrigerator door shut, suggested Mrs. Huggins with a smile. She had succeeded in stretching Henry's slacks, and now she leaned them tight on their frames against the sink. Please find something to do. Okay, Mom, said Henry, and walked out the back door in search of something to keep him busy. He considered. He could go over to the Quimby's house and play checkers with Beatrice, a girl whose real name was Beatrice, but her pesky little sister Ramona would probably spoil the game. He could go see his friend Murph, who was the smartest boy in the whole school, and see what he was building, if he was building anything interesting in his garage, or he could try to sell subscriptions to the journal. That's what he should do, but somehow Henry was not anxious to start ringing really strange doorbells. Not what he... No. What he really wanted to do was build something. He decided to scout around Klickitat Street and see if he could find enough boards for a doghouse. That would be the easiest to build, and it wouldn't take much lumber. As Henry walked around the side of his house, he noticed his next-door neighbor's car parked on the driveway with a U-Haul trailer attached. Now that was interesting, thought Henry. What was Hector Grumby going to haul? Remember Hector Grumby? He was the one that went fishing with him, and then Henry helped him lose his fish, or Ribsy did anyway. The front door of the Grumby's house opened, and Mr. Grumby appeared to be coming out backwards. This was even more interesting. Why didn't Mr. Grumby walk out frontwards? Bit by bit, more of his neighbor appeared, and Henry saw that he was tugging at something. Don't eat the dirt. Come here, ding dong. Henry decided he had better investigate. From the Grumby's front walk, he discovered that Mr. Grumby was pulling, and Mrs. Grumby was pushing, seriously, she's eating dirt, a bathtub out of the house. They were sliding it across the floor on an old blanket. Mr. Grumby paused to wipe his forehead. Whoa, he exclaimed. These old bathtubs were built like battleships. May I help? Henry asked eagerly. After all, his mother wanted him to find something to do. Sure, said Mr. Grumby. You can get on the other end and help push. Henry ran up the steps, and because the bathtub was blocking the door, he climbed into it, out the other side, and joined Mr. Grumby in pushing. Henry was secretly wondering, but was too polite to ask, if the Grumbys were planning to give up bathing. Instead, he inquired, "What are you going to do with it?" "Take it to the dump," answered Mr. Grumby, "unless you'd like to have it. We're remodeling the bathroom. We have to get rid of it to make room for the new tub, which will be delivered on Monday." Henry thought it over. There were all sorts of interesting things he could do with a bathtub in his backyard. Wash his dog Ribsy in it. Cool off in it himself on a hot day, kind of like a little baby swimming pool. Bob for apples at Halloween. Build a clubhouse around it if he had that much lumber. All sorts of things. A bathtub in the yard would be much more fun than a tub in the bathroom. But Henry was sure his mother would not feel the same way about it. "No, thank you, Mr. Grumby," Henry said with regret. Then he had a better idea. The new bathtub would come in a crate, and perhaps Mr. Grumby would let him have the boards to build a doghouse. By that time, several neighbors had come over to the Grumbys to watch. Even Ribsy had taken an interest and had come down from the Huggins' doormat where he had been napping. Mr. Grumby tied a rope around the tub, and with the help of Henry and the bystanders who hung onto the rope, eased the tub, bump, 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 down the front steps, slid it across the lawn, and then boosted it onto the trailer, where Mr. Grumby tied it securely. "Do you want to go for a ride to the dump?" Mr. Grumby asked Henry. "The dump?" "Yeah." Immediately, Henry pictured a fascinating jumble of old bathtubs, washing machines, tires, and baby buggies. There was no telling what he might find at the dump. There might even be some old boards he could bring home. "Can I ride in the bathtub?" he asked eagerly. "Sure." Mr. Grumby was agreeable. "Go ask your mother." Henry ran to the open kitchen window. "Hey, Mom! Mr. Grumby wants me to ride to the dump with him. Can I go?" "All right, Henry." Mrs. Huggins' voice came through the window. "Come on, Ribsy." Henry bounded across the lawn and climbed into the bathtub. Ribsy scrambled in behind him. "All set?" asked Mr. Grumby, opening the door of his car. "All set," answered Henry, and Mr. Grumby maneuvered the car and the trailer down the driveway and into the street. Riding in a bathtub, which of course had no springs or upholstery, nothing cushiony, was very bumpy, but Henry didn't care. No one else in the neighborhood had ever gone for a ride in a bathtub. Have you gone for a ride in a bathtub? I have not. He shouted and waved to his friends, Scooter and Robert, who were playing catch on the sidewalk. They stared after him in surprise. Ribsy put his paws on the edge of the tub and barked. When Mr. Grumby stopped at the first stop sign, Henry saw his friend Beezus and her little sister Ramona, who had a lot of string stuck to her chin with Scotch tape. Henry guessed she was trying to copy one of the many disguises of Sheriff Bud on television. Ramona never missed the Sheriff Bud program. "Hi," called Henry. "Hello, Henry." Beezus looked with admiration at Henry in the bathtub. He could tell she wished she could go for a ride in the bathtub, too. Ramona scowled ferociously and pointed straight at Henry. "Remember, only you can prevent forest fires!" Henry ignored Ramona. Ay. He knew she was only repeating what she had heard Smokey the Bear say on television all summer. "So long," he called to Beezus as Mr. Grumby drove on. Have you guys ever heard that? Remember, only you can prevent forest fires. It was an old campaign a long time ago, in the 50s apparently, but every once in a while you'll see it now. Ribsy, tired of barking over the edge of the tub, curled up and tried to go to sleep, but whenever the trailer went over a bump, he lifted his head and looked really annoyed. In the bathtub, little bumps felt like big bumps. They rumbled and bumped down Klickitat Street to a main thoroughfare, and then Henry had an idea. He was the President of the United States riding in a parade. He sat up straight in the bathtub, nodding and waving and doffing an imaginary hat, meaning taking off an imaginary hat. Mr. Grumby's car became a column of tanks preceding him down the avenue, and one airplane in the sky became a whole formation of fighter planes overhead. Henry could practically hear the cheers of the throngs crowded along the curbs to watch his journey to the White House. Henry did, in fact, hear a few real cheers, maybe jeers, like nah was a better word, mostly from boys along the way. "Hey, don't forget to wash your back. Be careful, don't step on the soap." With great dignity, Henry nodded. Come here. and waved. A great man on his way to the White House could ignore such people, especially when he was surrounded by Secret Servicemen. You want to see his picture? I love this old car too. It's really cool. So we still have the U-Haul company. We don't call it U-Haul it anymore, or it's not called that, but that's what it is way back then. Henry was having too much fun to act dignified for very long. He saw several boys standing in front of a bicycle shop and could not resist waving and shouting, "Hats off! The flag is passing by!" "Boo!" yelled the boys. "Boo! Boo!" They held their noses and waved Henry on down the street. Ribsy scrambled to his feet and barked over the edge of the tub. Henry, who was the kind of man who would take his dog to the White House, folded his arms and grinned in a superior manner because he was riding in the bathtub and the boys were standing on the sidewalk. Ha ha. The afternoon had turned out to be better than he had expected, and he still had the dump to look forward to. And then Henry passed a journal check heading in the opposite direction. So suddenly he was no longer the president of the United States. He was no longer interested in lumber for a doghouse. He was plain old Henry Huggins, a boy who had completely forgotten that he had 43 newspapers to deliver this afternoon. This was terrible! If he didn't get those papers delivered, his route might be taken away from him before he even had it a month. Then, because he was the youngest journal carrier in the neighborhood, Mr. Capper, who was the district manager, and everybody else would say that he was not old enough to handle a route. And that would be about the worst thing that could possibly happen. He would never live it down. "Mr. Grumby! Mr. Grumby!" yelled Henry, but Mr. Grumby drove on down the street, unaware he was carrying his passenger farther and farther from his paper route. "Mr. Grumby! Mr. Grumby!" There was no response but the bump and the rattle of the trailer. Henry was trapped in a bathtub in the middle of Lombard Street. "Mr. Grumby! Mr. Grumby!" At the next stop sign, Henry stood up in the bathtub and frantically waved both arms, hoping to attract Mr. Grumby's attention in the rearview mirror. It worked, because Mr. Grumby stuck his head out of the window, quit-eating dirt, and called, "Something wrong back there?" "My route!" yelled Henry. "I forgot my paper route. Come here." The signal changed, and cars and trucks began to honk. Mr. Grumby, in the center lane of traffic, had to drive on. Henry sat down with a bump. Saturday afternoon traffic was heavy, and it would be very difficult for Mr. Grumby to change lanes while pulling a trailer. They were still in the center lane when they came to the next stop sign. "I'll pull over as soon as I can," Mr. Grumby called back to Henry. Henry now felt ridiculous, sitting in the bathtub in the middle of a heavily traveled street. He wondered why he had thought riding in a tub would be fun in the first place. A boy who was old enough to have a paper route was too old to do such a silly thing. Cross street after cross street went by. And Henry was carried farther and farther away from his paper route. By this time, the other boys were counting and folding their papers, and Mr. Capper was probably wondering what had happened to Henry, the youngest carrier. Maybe Mr. Capper was already wondering what boy could take it over. Maybe he was saying to Scooter and the other boys, "Oh, I'm afraid Henry isn't old enough to handle a paper route. Do you know any other boy who could take his place?" It was not a happy prospect. A gap appeared in the right-hand lane of traffic, and Mr. Grumby eased his car and the trailer into it. Gosh, you're very hairy, sister. There was a solid line of cars parked along the curb and no place to stop. Another block went by. Still, there was no place where Mr. Grumby could stop. Henry caught a glimpse of a clock inside the dry cleaning shop. 4:35. He would never get to the district manager's garage and get his papers folded and delivered by 6 o'clock. Mr. Grumby signaled and made a right turn into a service station. Henry, followed by Ribsy, scrambled out of the bathtub as Mr. Grumby got out of his car. "I'm sure sorry I forgot about my route," Henry apologized. "What are we going to do about it?" asked Mr. Grumby. "I can't turn around and take you home now because the dump closes at 5, and I have to get rid of this tub this weekend. Besides, I'm renting the trailer by the hour, and I want to get it back as soon as I can." "That's okay," said Henry. "I have enough money for bus fare." "Do you know the way home?" asked Mr. Grumby. "Sure. Yeah, I can catch the bus across the street. I know where to transfer to the other bus." Henry was eager to be on his way. Okay, agreed Mr. Grumby, and climbed back into his car. Wait, yelled Henry, as Mr. Grumby started to drive off. Ribsy, can you take Ribsy with you? I can't take him on the bus. Remember, the very first time he ever found Ribsy, he wanted to take him on the bus. Oh my goodness. Across the street, a bus pulled up to the stop, discharged a passenger, and departed with a puff of exhaust. I guess so. Come on, Pooch. Mr. Grumby opened the rear door of his car, and Henry shoved Ribsy inside and slammed the door. Airplane. He knew from past experience that a dog was not allowed on a bus unless it was in a box tied shut. Henry had enough problems without searching for a box. When Mr. Grumby drove off, Henry waited for the traffic light to change from red to green before he crossed the street to the bus stop. He had just missed a bus, he knew, and as he wondered how long he would have to wait for the next bus, he fingered the change in the pocket of his jeans. Bus fare with a dime left over. Enough for one phone call. Probably he should call one of the boys and ask him to go over to Mr. Capper's garage and start folding his papers for him. But which boy? He only had one dime. What if he called Robert's house and Robert's mother answered and said he wasn't home? Then his dime would be gone. This is long before the days of cell phones, my friends. Henry decided to call his own house and ask his mother to call Robert or Murph for him. Once more, Henry waited for the traffic signal to change. He ran back across the street into the glass telephone booth in the corner of the service station. He pushed his dime into the smallest hole, dialed, and counted 4 rings. Hello? It was Mrs. Huggins. Say, Mom, began Henry, his eye on the bus stop. My paper route kind of slipped my mind, and I wondered if you could call Robert or Murph or one of the fellows and ask them to carry or fold my newspapers for me. I'll be there as soon as I can. Henry, where are you? Asked Mrs. Huggins. I'm at a filling station out on Lombard Street, answered Henry. It's 20 minutes to 5 now. Mrs. Huggins sounded exasperated. You'll never get your papers delivered in time. Mom, I can't stand here all day arguing, Henry pointed out as a bus pulled up to the curb. Here's my bus now. Honestly, Henry, sometimes I wonder... Click. Henry had to cut his mother off. The traffic signal changed from red to green. Nope. Yeah. Oh, no. It changed to red just as Henry reached the curb. Oh, Mr. Bus Driver! Henry called frantically. The bus driver glanced at him and pulled out into the stream of traffic. He had a schedule to follow, and he couldn't wait for one boy. Ugh! Henry groaned, and then he discovered it wasn't even his bus anyway. When the signal changed to green, Henry walked across the street. He had done all he could do to get his route started, and there was no use worrying about it now. But Henry did worry. He wondered if his mother was able to find a boy to fold his papers, and he wondered what Mr. Capper would say when the boy folded Henry's journals. Henry worried when the bus finally came. He worried while he rode on what seemed like the slowest bus in the world. He worried when he got off and waited for the second bus. He worried when he had transferred to the second bus, which seemed even slower. If there was ever a contest to find the slowest bus in the world, this bus would win. A snail could beat it any day. And then, as the bus finally reached Henry's neighborhood and drove down one of the streets on which Henry should have been delivering papers that very minute, Henry saw a car exactly like the Huggins' car. In fact, it was the Huggins' car. Henry could tell because he saw his mother get out and throw a folded newspaper, quit eating dirt. She's such a ding-dong. Toward the house. Oh my gosh. She threw it really awkwardly. Ooh. The paper did not go far enough, so she had to pick it up and throw it again. Henry was horrified. A boy did not want to see his mother delivering papers, especially when she was such a terrible thrower. It was awful. He did not see how anybody could grow up and throw that way. Hastily, Henry jerked the cord that stopped the bus at the next corner. He bounded out of the door and ran back to Mrs. Huggins, who was consulting his route book to see where to throw the next paper. Oh, Henry could not help feeling he had reached her just in the nick of time. He did not want the passengers on the bus to see her throw again. And there she is, high heels and everything. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's not too thrilled to be doing that. Hey, Mom, Henry panted. How come you're delivering my papers? There wasn't anyone else to do it, answered his mother. I couldn't reach Robert or Murph, so I drove over to Mr. Capper's and I found the other carriers were leaving with their papers. I've delivered 28 of them. Gee, Mom, did you fold my papers? Asked Henry. If she had, she was better at folding than throwing. No, the other boys had already folded them for you, answered his mother. They must have known you were going to be late. Henry opened the car door and pulled out his bag of journals. I'll take over, Mom, he said as he slipped the bag over his journals. Thanks a lot. You saved my life. You're welcome, answered Mrs. Huggins, and then added, I guess, as she climbed into the car. She's still eating dirt. I don't even know. Henry had to know something. What did Mr. Capper say? He called after his mother. He just laughed and wanted to know if I was taking over your route, answered Mrs. Huggins. Henry wished he had his bicycle. He could actually cover his route almost as fast on foot, but it was more fun to deliver papers on his bike. Because he was short for his age, the bag of papers bumped against his legs when he went on foot. He walked up one driveway and down the next, remembering which customer wanted his paper left on the doormat and which one had warned him against breaking the geraniums in the flower box on the porch. Sophie! Good gravity. Seriously. You're like a 2-year-old. Henry walked as fast as he could and soon covered his route. He was late. He knew. Yeah, come here. Sit here. Sit. Or whatever, not. Such a good dog. Anyway, he was hoping that nobody would complain, and so far he had been really lucky. There was no reason why he should not continue to be. He was tired and sweaty when he reached home, but he was cheerful. The papers were delivered, weren't they? And that's all that mattered. When Henry opened the front door, he was surprised to see his father wearing a white shirt and a necktie. Mr. Huggins always wore a sports shirt around home. Hi, Dad. How come you're all dressed up? He asked. Because your mother had quite a day with one thing or another around here, and we are going to take her out to dinner for a change, said Mr. Huggins. Oh, okay, maybe I better get cleaned up. Henry was surprised at this change in routine. He hoped they would not go to a fancy place with cloth napkins and a long menu. When he went out to dinner, he liked to order a hamburger and a pie. Well, Henry, Mr. Huggins sounded stern, don't you have anything to say for yourself? I finally got the papers delivered, answered Henry, not quite certain what his father expected of him. It seems to me your mother also delivered quite a few papers, said Mr. Huggins. Oh, yeah, golly, Dad, you should see the way she throws. Oh, confided Henry, demonstrating to his father the way his mother delivered papers. It's pretty awful. Henry, I want one thing clearly understood, said Mr. Huggins, ignoring his son's remark. That paper route is yours. It is not your mother's route. It is not my route. It is yours. You are to deliver the papers and collect the money and do all the work yourself. If you can't do it without any help from us, you'll have to give up the route. Do you understand? Henry looked at the carpet. His father did not often speak to him this way, and he felt terrible. He wanted his father to be proud of him because he was the youngest paper carrier in the neighborhood. Yes, Dad, he answered. He felt he should offer some explanation for forgetting his route. I was planning to get some old boards to build a doghouse. Mr. Huggins grinned. You don't need to build a doghouse. You're in the doghouse with your mother already. And that's an expression. When somebody says that you're in the doghouse, that just means like you're in trouble. You have to sleep out with the dog. So he's like, you're already in it. Mrs. Huggins came clicking into the room on high heels. Henry caught a whiff of perfume and noticed she was wearing one of her very best dresses. That meant a restaurant with cloth napkins. She looked so nice. Henry felt ashamed of himself for criticizing the way she threw and for wanting a hamburger for dinner. Gee, Mom, I'm sorry I caused you so much trouble, he said. It seemed like such a good chance to go for a ride in a bathtub that I forgot all about my route. In a bathtub? Exclaimed Mrs. Huggins. Yeah, didn't you know? Mr. Grumby had this old bathtub he was hauling to the dump on a trailer. A bathtub? She sat down and began to laugh. You mean you were riding down Lombard Street in a bathtub? Well, you told me to find something to do, Henry pointed out. Yes, I know I did, admitted Mrs. Huggins, but riding around town in a bathtub was not exactly what I had in mind. Honestly, Henry, sometimes I wonder how you get into these things. I don't know, Mom. I just do, said Henry, thinking with regret of the good idea that had somehow gone wrong. He knew one thing for sure. If he was going to keep his paper route, he'd better not get into things. He'd better keep out of things, especially late in the afternoon. And that, my friends, is the end of our first chapter of Henry and the Clubhouse. Boy, first chapter and he already got in trouble. I tell you. Chapter 2, Henry and the new dog. Yikes, right? Quick reminder for your parents, if they haven't yet, please email me, lmckenzie-miller@turlock.k12.ca.us. This is just if you want to hook up for the Zoom sessions that we've started. And also, I did email every single parent. I just hope they got it. And do me a favor and answer that email. That would be very helpful. I appreciate it. All right, please stay safe. Happy Friday again. Have a great weekend. Maybe I'll do some recording over the weekend. I'm not sure if I will or not, but have a great weekend. I love you guys. Stay safe and stay inside. Bye.